episode of Seeing Sentai. I'm Mars Girl. Last week we finished talking about Jaka Dengekitai. This week we're talking about the following franchise called Battle Fever J, episodes 1 through 7. It may be that I'm so excited about talking about this franchise, perhaps because it's not Jaka, and I don't exactly have a whole heck of a lot of expectations for it. It's not starting out by throwing me into something that I think it's gonna be for a while, and then suddenly changing somewhere down the line, to the best of my knowledge anyway. But at the same time, I'm kind of trying to keep some spoilers off my back, so if I'm missing things, it's because I just plain haven't gotten there yet, and I hope you'll understand that. This series started at the beginning of 1979, so it'll be the last franchise that takes place during the 1970s, that was created during the 1970s, and it was the first Super Sentai series to be created under the partnership of Marvel. Granted, it's not the first franchise or the first television series that Toei would partner with Marvel on. That would, of course, be the Japanese series Spider-Man, and in fact, there were a number of influences from that Spider-Man series that kind of carry over into Battle Fever J. Very, very interesting set of events. You'll take, for example, the appearance of the first giant Robo to enter the Super Sentai franchise. That is so cool and so exciting. This also marks the first franchise where they call, or the first series where they call this franchise Super Sentai. Now granted, they'll go back later and kind of grandfather in the previous two series so that this whole thing becomes known as being Super Sentai, but this is the first time they officially gave it that label. So what is Battle Fever J? What exactly is going on in this world created under the title Battle Fever J? Well, there's an organization pretty much just called Battle Fever under a general, and their secret base is deep down under the ocean. To get to this base under the ocean, you have to go through this convoluted, like, underground tunnel, and then you have to take this ship down underwater, and then you have to get, like, sucked up into the secret base. It's a really long, convoluted process. So there is this Battle Fever base where they're kind of looking after Japan and the world on a more grand scale. There's, for starters, 4 main male members, most of which, after the first episode, you're never going to know them by their main names, but they go by different regions or different countries. They're coded by these different countries' names, or perhaps they came from those countries or studied or lived in those countries for a while, and that includes Battle Japan, Battle France, Battle Cossack, who represents the Soviet Union, and Battle Kenya. And then finally, within the first episode, you'll finally get Miss America, whose father is an American, and I guess she's kind of raised in America as well. To go over some of these actors, you're going to recognize some of these actors from a few other places. Battle Cossack, for example. You're going to recognize him because you probably saw him already in Go Ranger as the Green Ranger. So he plays a total of 2 Rangers over the course of the Super Sentai franchise. You're going to recognize the actor for Battle Kenya, not only because he goes on to be other Super Sentai characters, but because he's also going to become Space Sheriff Gyavan. In the very first episode of Battle Fever J, the monster is played by a pretty young lady with a red umbrella who's going around stabbing people with poison and killing them. You might recognize her because she's Agent 007, also from Go Ranger. And thus we kind of get down to the creation of just who Battle Fever J is. And really, they never go running around calling themselves Battle Fever J. They just kind of go by Battle Fever, which perhaps is more accurate. The J probably is just for our sake to kind of let us know, hey, this is taking place in Japan, this is important to Japan, yay Japan. Because we see this new threat showing up, this new threat being an evil organization by the name of Egos, being led by some evil, glowing baddie by the name of Satan Egos, we now know that we need something bigger and something badder to take down these enemies. And thus, the general creates these new Battle Fever super suits that are going to kind of magnify the abilities that all of these characters already have latent within themselves. And the suits are getting, progressively better as the franchise continues on forward. I'm not too keen on the masks themselves. In some cases, they kind of freak me out. Miss America's mask kind of freaks me out. But Japan and France are kind of okay. They don't freak me out nearly as much as all the rest of the masks do. In the case of Miss America, whenever she gets into the suit, it's kind of half and half whether or not there's actually a woman wearing her suit or if it's actually a stuntman. It kind of looks like if there's any point in time where Miss America has to do any really big, interesting stunts or flips or anything like that, they put a dude in the suit. But otherwise, if she has to just pose or whatever, then they put a woman back in the suit. For the sake of their suit acting abilities, I think in a lot of cases they went for straight up stereotypes, and I don't necessarily understand all of them. Miss America, for some reason when she announces herself, she's doing this weird snapping motion, and I'm like, what, is that American? I don't entirely understand. And in the case of Battle France, that guy really confuses me, because I really can't help but feel like the producers didn't know what France does or looks like, because instead they have him doing like flamenco dances from Spain and stuff like that. It absolutely doesn't make sense. It's like they confused France for Spain. Two completely different countries that do two completely different things. Very, very bizarre. Under Satan Agos' command is Commander Header, and him you might also recognize. He was the guy who played Iron Claw in the previous series of Jaka, or at least sometimes it's that guy. They kind of go back and forth between that actor and then some other actor, and you get kind of confused. To the best of my understanding, in this next week when I start going over some more episodes, they're gonna finally pick and choose and stick with one of those two guys, but I don't entirely understand why it is they went back and forth for the first few episodes. In any case, Satan Agos continues to create and pump out brand new monsters, trying to destroy Battle Fever, trying to, take over Japan. There isn't really a very clear goal or clear reason as to why this is happening. It's kind of just straight up bad guys versus good guys. That's okay, so long as that's all my expectation is for this series. I think it's gonna be fine. I feel like the fight sequences are only so-so at this current point in time. The choreography, just for some reason I feel like Jaka had way better choreography than so far at this point in Battle Fever J, and I'm wondering if perhaps that's partially because of visibility in the newly designed helmets. That's entirely possible, I'm not really sure, but for some reason in my mind it just kind of leaves a lot to be desired. There's a lot of standing there, there's a lot of the characters aren't really teaming up and helping each other out. It just seems very slow-paced thus far, and maybe that will change. By the end of every single major battle, each individual member takes out these staffs that they then put together to create one big cannon-like thing that they call the Pentaforce. Then they shoot the main monster of the episode, and the monster explodes. Pretty typical Super Sentai fare, really. But finally, after a few episodes in, we get to the unveiling of Super Sentai's very first giant robot. Now, this robot does not combine. It launches out of a submarine that also, for some reason, can fly, but that's about as much transforming as it does. Really, it's just kind of undocking from the submarine, and all 5 members are in there piloting this giant robot. So you can already see the birthing of the ideas of what we're going to see in future mecha to come. Also, the way the monsters function is probably a little bit different from what you're used to at this current point in Super Sentai's history. It's not that the monster dies and then grows up to become a giant monster. It's that Agos makes a little bitty version of the monster and then makes an enormous robot-sized version of the monster that in fact is a robot, whereas the little one's a monster, the big one's just a mech version of the monster. And at sometimes they launch both of them at the same time. So it forces Battle Fever to have to fight the little monster on the ground who's distracting them first, while the giant robot is kind of tearing around, destroying everything. It's kind of hardcore looking, all of these explosions, and it's really interesting to see how, at the beginning, the Battle Fever team kind of doesn't have a clue what to do, because they've never seen anything like it. There is no precedent for giant monsters, like, what is it, what do we do? And they have to get all these instructions on how to fight this other giant robot. So they get into their own giant robot for the first time, called the Battle Fever Robo, and it can kind of hover, it can land on the ground and fight, and it can pull out just about any weapon you can possibly think of. Swords and knives and axes, and it's just pulling these things out of, like, end space and throwing them and fighting with them, and yeah, the fights are kind of clunky, but you can see, even in a matter of a small handful of episodes, you see them start to slowly get better and better choreography, and it feels like maybe the guys in the suit are finally feeling like, yeah, I'm starting to get used to this, now we can make this look a little better. The effects that they use on Battle Fever Robo to kind of perform its finishing moves are really cool. You see these really interesting After Effect blurs, and then it puts these two bladed weapons together and then throws both bladed weapons into the opposing robot, and then the robot explodes. And then Battle Fever Robo, like, clearly they only had so much technology and they're playing around with their own little toys, and it's kind of like, I must go, my planet needs me, and it goes and just launches off into the sky. Very comical, but at the same time, it's like, man, it's so heart-pumping to see the way this program progresses. Very, very cool. Thus far, there's very few things in the franchise, or in this particular series, I should specify, for me to really complain about. But if I have one complaint, it's that Diane, the woman they have playing the role of Diane, very strange, who's Miss America, she does nothing. I'm kind of not liking her so far. She's seriously, I don't know what she's there for, just to be the female of the group, I guess, but as all of the other dudes are out running about doing, you know, little missions before we finally get to the final fight of, oh, we figured out what's happening, and now we gotta fight the final bad guy, and now we gotta get into the robot, blah blah blah, she just sits at the base and she doesn't do anything, and she complains that Battle Kenya's bringing in animals, like little baby elephants and stuff, and she just gets scared, and she doesn't want to do anything. She goes shopping, she goes dancing. What does she do? She's kind of useless, and it makes me so mad. Like, you could have, look, the last two series had relatively decent female members of their teams, and this woman is a horrible female representation. She just doesn't really want to do anything, which is awful when you consider in the very first episode her father dies and gives her motivation to become a member of Battle Fever, and she doesn't do anything. Very, very disappointing. Right now, the series is not super deep, so there's not too much to super elaborate upon. However, you can slowly see it becoming actually quite good, as it gets moments that are increasingly serious as the episodes have gone on, and I assume there's going to be this overarching, oh man, we can really see where this is going, something really serious. You can see, for example, when we first are introduced to Battle Fever Robo, we watch a man rescue his children and then decide, no, I need to stop these evil guys from being able to create more robots, and so he goes into Agos' secret base where they're building their own secret robot, and then he suicide bombs himself, and the two kids know that he's dead, and they're just sobbing, and it's so serious, and it's so sad, and you're like really blown away, like, man, this is a kid's show, but suddenly there's this moment injected into it, which is kind of opposite of Jaka, where it started out being nothing but, oh my god, hardcore, there's all these really serious problems, and then once they went really silly, they couldn't go back to being really serious again. But to be able to find a balance between those two things, I think is something perhaps a lot better. Better than what Jaka was able to give us on either end of the spectrum. Another interesting episode was the episode in which for a little bit you think, oh my god, is Battle Japan turning toward Egos? Is he trying to give away plans for the Battle Fever Robo before Battle Fever Robo has been completed? And he goes to sell the plans to an Egos member, and that Egos member is a woman that, again, you might recognize, who shows up later on in other Super Sentai series, and especially you'll recognize her as Bandora, or as Rita Repulsa from Zyuranger or from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Just by face and voice alone, in an instant I knew it was her, and you're like, oh man, that's so cool that she shows up, and you start to see some of these actors just repeatedly showing up through Toei franchises over and over again. Very, very fun and very interesting to point out. I'm gonna keep trying to plow through this series. I am a few episodes behind, trying to get caught up, and I hope you guys are going to stay caught up right along with me so that we can just have some fun discussions with one another, perhaps in the comments or something. If you are a Patreon contributor, thank you so much for your assistance. You make things like this and my other shows possible. If you would like to know more about it, check it out at patreon.com/MarsGirl, where you can see further rewards that you can be getting for becoming a Patreon contributor. Also check me out over at marsgirl.tumblr.com, where you can read more episode synopses as I'm kind of plowing through these episodes day by day. Thanks very much, you guys. I'll be talking to you all next week.